Some truths don't just reveal pain, they redefine identity. And when someone you love rewrites your story without you, the pages left behind aren't just empty. They're stained with betrayal. Some betrayals don't just end a marriage, they destroy lives. It started with a signature, a single legal document meant to close one chapter and start another. But for Emily Turner, signing those divorce papers wasn't the end. It was a carefully set trap. The house was gone, the bank accounts were drained, her name once respected was now tangled in lies she didn't create, and the man who had vowed to love her had spent years ensuring she walked away with nothing. But power shifts, and men like Derek Langston, the ones who believe they are untouchable, always make one fatal mistake. They underestimate the woman they tried to break. And now, the question is, who will be left standing when it's over? Before we jump into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love hearing how far our stories reach. Every comment connects us, reminding us how powerful storytelling truly is. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're always first in line for the next chapter. Now, let's get comfortable because this story promises to take you on an unforgettable ride. Let's begin. Emily woke up that morning with a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. It was her 10th wedding anniversary with Derek, a milestone she had been looking forward to celebrating. As she stretched beneath the soft linen sheets, she let her mind wander back to the early years of their marriage. Derek had been different then. Ambitious, driven, but still tender and full of passion. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and heartfelt promises, making her believe in forever. Over the years, that spark had dimmed. His career had consumed him, his affection turning into absent-minded kisses and rushed conversations between business calls. But Emily had always reasoned with herself that this was the natural course of a long marriage. Success required sacrifice, and Derek was simply working hard for their future. Today, however, was supposed to be different. Today was about them. She spent the morning meticulously planning their anniversary dinner. She had made a reservation at the restaurant where they had celebrated their first anniversary, a cozy, candlelit spot overlooking the lake. She chose a deep red dress that Derek had once said was his favorite on her, and she styled her hair the way he used to love. She wanted tonight to remind him of everything they had built together, of the love that had once defined their marriage. Before heading out to get ready, she sent Derek a quick text to confirm their plans. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, a brief reply came. Busy with meetings. Might be late. Emily stared at the screen, her fingers tightening around the phone. A familiar pang of disappointment settled in her chest, but she quickly shook it off. Derek had been under a lot of stress lately. He wouldn't forget a day this important. He would come. As the evening stretched on, Emily lit candles in the dining room, arranging everything perfectly while stealing glances at the clock. When the reservation time came and went, she realized he wasn't going to show. Elsewhere in the city, at a different restaurant, far grander than the one she had booked, Derek was indulging in an intimate dinner, not with his wife, but with Sabrina Cole. Sabrina was everything a man like Derek could desire. Elegant, poised, and dangerously intelligent. As a wealthy widow, she moved effortlessly through the elite social circles, commanding respect and intrigue. But more than that, Sabrina was a strategist. She knew exactly what Derek wanted: power, influence, and status, and she had the means to give it to him. Their laughter blended with the clinking of crystal glasses, their body language speaking volumes. A casual observer might mistake them for a couple deeply in love. In reality, Sabrina's affection was calculated, her every move designed to deepen her hold on Derek. A friend of Emily's, seated at a nearby table, recognized Derek immediately. She hesitated for a moment, debating whether to intervene. But the sight of Derek's hand resting on Sabrina's, the way he leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh, left no room for doubt. The friend discreetly snapped a photo and sent it to Emily with a simple message: "I think you should see this." Emily was still seated at the dining table, untouched plates before her, when her phone vibrated. She clicked on the message, and the image staring back at her sent a cold shock through her veins. Derek and Sabrina, together. A surge of nausea swept over her as she stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. She refused to believe that the man she had spent 10 years of her life with, the man she had built a home and future with, was capable of such betrayal. When Derek finally arrived home later that night, Emily was waiting. She stood in the dimly lit living room, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the space. The moment he stepped through the door, she held up her phone, the image of him with Sabrina still glaring on the screen. "Where were you?" Her voice was calm, too calm. Derek barely glanced at the phone before exhaling sharply. "Work dinner." She let out a short laugh, disbelieving. "Work dinner? So this is what business meetings look like now?" Derek sighed, setting down his briefcase with deliberate patience. "Emily, don't start, it was just a meal. Sabrina is an important business contact." "She's holding your hand, Derek." He rolled his eyes, running a hand through his hair. "You're overreacting, I swear. It's nothing. You're being paranoid." Emily searched his face, looking for any trace of guilt, any flicker of remorse. But there was none. He looked at her as if she were the unreasonable one, as if she were creating a problem that didn't exist. "You've changed," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Derek stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice softening just slightly. "I've been under a lot of pressure. You know that. Can we not turn this into something bigger than it is? You know that. Can we not turn this into something bigger than it is?" Emily wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him, so she nodded, forcing herself to push the image out of her mind. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the rhythmic sound of Derek's breathing beside her, one thought refused to leave her mind. What if she wasn't overreacting? What if, for the first time, she was finally seeing the truth? Emily couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. Ever since the night she confronted Derek about Sabrina, he had dismissed her suspicions so easily, brushed off the photos as nothing more than a business dinner. But the way he had done it, the way he had looked her in the eyes without a flicker of hesitation, without the slightest crack in his composure, left her feeling hollow. It wasn't reassurance she had received that night. It was manipulation. And now, in the days that followed, she began to notice things she had once ignored. Derek was growing more distant. He came home late, later than usual. His excuses were short and lacking detail. Meetings, business trips, last-minute client dinners. His touch, once so familiar, so effortless, now felt forced, if it came at all. At night, he barely spoke to her, retreating to his office or scrolling mindlessly through his phone. When she reached for him, he pulled away. The warmth that had once existed between them had turned into something cold, something unrecognizable. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, had it always been this way and she had just refused to see it? Or worse, was it her? That silent voice inside her, the one she had fought for years, whispered again, "Maybe you're imagining things. Maybe this is what marriage looks like after a decade." She had always feared abandonment. Even as a child, the thought of someone she loved walking away had been her worst nightmare. Was she seeing the truth, or was she letting that fear distort everything? The confusion only deepened her ache. Her answer came sooner than she expected. One morning, while tidying up Derek's office, she found a crumpled receipt tucked beneath a stack of papers. It was for a luxury hotel, one she had never stayed at, with a date that coincided with a night he had claimed to be working late. Her fingers gripped the paper as if it were a shard of glass, her eyes scanning the numbers over and over again, willing them to make sense. The sickening realization hit her like a punch to the chest. She felt her legs weaken, her breath shortening. Her reality had begun to fracture. Her hands trembled as she sifted through the drawers, her breathing shallow. And then she found them. Gift receipts for expensive jewelry, designer handbags, silk lingerie. None of it was for her. A lump formed in her throat as her vision blurred. She pressed her palm against the desk to steady herself, the cold surface grounding her in the moment. Rage, confusion, betrayal, all collided inside her, a storm of emotions she had no way to release. The woman who had devoted years of her life to standing beside this man was now reduced to a stranger sifting through evidence of her own irrelevance. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen any of it. But her heart, bruised and breaking, told her otherwise. She needed more. She needed the truth. So she followed him. That evening, when Derek told her he had a late meeting at the office, Emily didn't question it. She simply waited. And then, when he walked out the door, she grabbed her car keys and followed at a careful distance. He never went to his office. Instead, he drove to an affluent neighborhood just outside the city, pulling into the driveway of an elegant estate. Emily's pulse pounded as she parked down the street, her hands tightening around the steering wheel. She watched, breath hitching, as Derek stepped out of the car, adjusted his tie, and walked straight to the front door. It opened before he could knock. Sabrina stood there, dressed in a sleek, form-fitting black dress, a glass of wine in hand. She smiled, a knowing, satisfied smile, and pulled him inside. The door clicked shut behind them. Emily's body went numb. This wasn't an affair. This wasn't some sordid fling. This was a second life. A parallel existence that Derek had built without her. She sat motionless, frozen in her seat, heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. The taste of betrayal was bitter in her mouth. Time moved strangely, every second stretching endlessly as her eyes stayed fixed on that closed door, the symbol of everything she had lost without ever knowing it. The drive home was a blur. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. But she refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. Not until she had the chance to look him in the eye and hear the lies spill from his mouth one more time. She was waiting when he came home. Derek barely glanced at her as he stepped inside, shrugging off his coat, loosening his tie, as though it had been just another ordinary evening. But the moment he saw her standing there, saw the fire in her eyes, the steel in her posture, he hesitated. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. He sighed, shaking his head. "Late meeting, like I said. I told you not to wait up." She didn't speak. Instead, she lifted her phone, the screen glowing with the picture she had taken of him walking into Sabrina's home. Derek's jaw tightened. But then, unbelievably, he smirked. "You've been following me," he said, amusement lacing his tone. "That's pathetic, Emily." Her stomach twisted, but she stood her ground. "Who is she to you?" He exhaled slowly, as if exhausted by her questioning. "Does it matter?" Emily felt something inside her snap. "Yes, Derek, it does matter. I am your wife." Derek let out a short laugh, one filled with condescension rather than humor. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a man burdened with an inconvenient obligation. "Emily, look at us. Look at what we've become. We're stagnant, boring. You still want to live in this fantasy where we're some perfect couple, but the truth is we're not. We haven't been for a long time." She felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. "So what? You just replace me? Start a new life with someone else behind my back?" Derek met her gaze, eyes cold and unrepentant. "Sabrina understands me. She supports me. She's not." He hesitated, searching for the words that would cut the deepest. "She's not clinging to the past. She knows how to move forward." Emily recoiled as though he had struck her. And then, as if this moment wasn't already devastating enough, Derek reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of papers, and tossed them onto the coffee table with a thud. A divorce settlement, already prepared, already signed. Her breath hitched. "You planned this?" He nodded. "I wanted to do this the right way, but you had to push." She shook her head, taking a step back. "And Sabrina, she knows about this?" Derek's expression shifted then, just slightly. The smirk returned. But there was something else now, something smug, something victorious. "She's pregnant." Emily felt the room spin. "She's carrying my child, Emily. We're starting a family, a real one. I need to do right by her." A slow, sinking dread filled her. This wasn't just about infidelity. This wasn't just betrayal. This was erasure. He wasn't just leaving her. He was replacing her. But then, through the haze of her pain, she looked at him, really looked at him, and in his confidence, in his arrogance, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't love for Sabrina. It wasn't devotion. It was calculation. She turned her gaze to the doorway where Sabrina now stood watching. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no regret, just victory. And that was when Emily knew. Sabrina didn't love Derek. She had never loved him. She had simply won. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the papers. Derek watched, waiting, expecting her to crumble, expecting her to break. But as she stared at the ink on the pages, the words that would end 10 years of her life in the span of a few signatures, she realized something. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Emily still stared at the divorce papers in front of her, her hands resting motionless on the cold surface of the dining table. It had been days since Derek had thrown them at her. His expression had been unreadable, his voice cold and detached. The ink had dried, her name scrawled at the bottom of the pages in a moment of shock and defeat. But as she sat there, staring at the words that declared the end of a decade-long marriage, she realized something. This wasn't just about a failed relationship. This was about power, control, erasure. Derek wanted to strip her of everything, not just as his wife, but as a person. She refused to let that happen. Summoning what little strength remained inside her, Emily reached for her phone. She needed a lawyer, a good one. She would fight this, no matter how much Derek believed she wouldn't. When she met with the attorney, she laid out her concerns. She had spent years supporting Derek's career, standing by his side through his relentless ambition. She had played the role of the perfect wife, managing their home, entertaining his colleagues, sacrificing her own aspirations to build the life they had. Surely she had a right to a fair share of what they had built together. But as the lawyer reviewed the paperwork, Emily saw the shift in his expression. His once neutral, professional demeanor turned grim. He leaned back, tapping a finger against the file. "This is going to be difficult," he said, his voice measured. Her stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, flipping through the documents. "Your husband planned this for a long time. Legally, most of your assets aren't actually yours anymore. They've been transferred to his company, which means they're considered business assets rather than marital property. You're walking away with nearly nothing?" The words knocked the breath from her lungs. "That's not possible." "It is," the lawyer said. "He's been careful. Every loophole, every financial maneuver, he's used them all. Even if we challenge it, this will be a long and expensive fight." Emily swallowed hard. She felt like she was drowning. As if the betrayal of their marriage wasn't enough, Derek had meticulously planned his escape. Every decision he had made over the past few years, every transfer, every reallocation of funds had been calculated to leave her with nothing. And he had done it with a level of confidence that suggested he knew she wouldn't fight back. That was his mistake. Derek barely reacted when she informed him she was contesting the settlement. He sat across from her in the lawyer's office, calm, polished, his fingers tapping lazily against the armrest of his chair. "You're wasting your time, Emily," he said, voice smooth, almost amused. "You're a smart woman. Surely you understand how this works. I built this. You didn't." She clenched her fists beneath the table. "I was there every step of the way," he smirked. "No court will see it that way." Sitting beside him, Sabrina observed the exchange in silence, her expression unreadable. But Emily could feel it, the control she had over Derek, the subtle way she leaned in when he spoke, the quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She wasn't just an affair, she was orchestrating this. Sabrina was more than a mistress. She was Derek's strategist, the one who had likely urged him to move the assets, to tighten his hold on his finances. Emily could see it now, how Derek had started closing off, how he had changed in ways she couldn't quite understand at the time. Sabrina hadn't just stepped into his life. She had reshaped it, molded it to fit her vision. And now she wanted Emily erased completely. Days passed and the fight grew harder. Emily's lawyer made little progress. Every avenue they pursued led to another legal dead end. With each meeting, it became clearer. Derek wasn't just cutting her out of his life. He was systematically dismantling everything she had. Her bank accounts had been reduced to almost nothing. She had no property in her name, no financial security. She was watching everything she had once believed was theirs vanish right before her eyes. And yet, she refused to break. She knew Derek expected her to crumble. He expected her to take the scraps he was offering and disappear quietly. But she wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You can't win this," Derek told her one evening when they crossed paths outside the lawyer's office. She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Watch me." But the truth was, she was running out of options. One evening, after another failed legal strategy, Emily sat alone in her nearly empty apartment. She had spent the last of her savings on legal fees, and the weight of reality was pressing down on her harder than ever. She needed help. A friend, seeing the desperation in her eyes, handed her a business card. "Call him," she said. "If anyone can take Derek down, it's Marcus Hale." Emily hesitated. She had heard the name before. Marcus was a well-known divorce attorney, famous for his ruthless strategies and his ability to dismantle even the most powerful opponents in court. But he was expensive, and Emily was barely keeping herself afloat. Still, she had nothing left to lose. When she met Marcus, he was direct, wasting no time on pleasantries. "I've seen your case," he said, flipping through the paperwork. "Your husband is a bastard." Emily let out a sharp breath, caught off guard by his bluntness. He glanced up at her. "But he's not invincible." She searched his face, looking for something. Confidence, certainty, anything that suggested he saw a way out of this. And then he leaned forward. "The question isn't whether we can win." He tapped a finger against the papers. "It's whether you're ready to fight like hell." For the first time since this nightmare began, Emily felt something she hadn't in weeks: hope. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "Let's fight." The house was no longer hers. The home she had built with Derek, the place where they had shared years of laughter, love, and even their hardest fights, now belonged to a man who had cast her aside without a second thought. Emily stood at the threshold, suitcase in hand, staring at the polished wood floors one last time. It didn't feel real. None of it did. A moving crew, hired by Derek's attorney, was already there, systematically removing the last remnants of her existence from the place she had once believed would be hers forever. She wasn't allowed to take much, only a few personal belongings. Everything else, every piece of furniture, every photograph, every memory, was no longer hers to claim. Each item they lifted out felt like another piece of her soul being discarded. She bit down hard on her lip to keep it from trembling. Her fingers clutched around the worn handle of her suitcase, like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. This wasn't just a move, it was an exorcism of everything she had once believed was permanent. She had no choice but to leave. A friend, one of the few who had not turned away from her in the wake of the divorce scandal, offered her a spare bedroom. It was a small mercy, one she was grateful for. But as she lay in bed that first night, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of a house that was not her own, she understood one thing with devastating clarity: she couldn't stay here forever. Emily needed to rebuild. She needed to reclaim her independence. The next morning, she began applying for jobs. She had experience managing events, networking, handling corporate affairs, skills that had once been invaluable to Derek's success. Surely someone would see her worth. But interview after interview, door after door, rejection came swiftly. At first, the emails were polite. "We regret to inform you," but after weeks of silence and failed attempts, she finally got an answer that chilled her to the bone. "Look, Miss Turner," one hiring manager said, shifting uncomfortably, "it's not about your qualifications, it's your reputation." "My reputation?" she repeated, heart pounding. He hesitated before lowering his voice. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but your ex-husband is well connected. He's making it difficult for you." She left the office in a daze, the reality of what was happening settling over her like a suffocating weight. Derek wasn't just content with taking her home and her money. He was ensuring that she had no way to support herself. And then came the whispers, the sideways glances when she walked into a room. She hadn't paid them much attention at first, assuming it was just the natural fallout of a high-profile divorce. But soon she started hearing the rumors firsthand. "She stole from him," someone whispered at a cafe. "She was cheating on him," another murmured at a networking event. "She's a liability," a potential employer said, shaking his head. "I can't risk hiring her." Everywhere she turned, she was met with cold shoulders and closed doors. Derek had painted her as an untrustworthy, disgraced woman, and the world believed him. With no options left, she used the last of her savings to rent a small, barely furnished apartment in a part of town she never thought she'd live in. The walls were thin, the kitchen barely big enough for one person, but it was hers, a place where she wasn't under anyone's control. She lived frugally, stretching every dollar. She took whatever work she could find, waiting tables, answering phones, even cleaning houses. Some nights she came home too tired to cry, her hands cracked from scrubbing countertops, her feet blistered from hours standing. Yet every small coin she earned felt more real than the luxury that had once smothered her. She wasn't surviving off Derek's empire now. She was surviving off her own resilience. But at least it was honest. Then, one afternoon, everything collapsed. She had just finished a shift at a small diner, counting the few crumpled bills in her pocket when her phone rang. It was her bank. "I'm sorry, Miss Turner," the voice on the other end said, clipped and indifferent, "but your accounts have been frozen pending investigation." Her breath caught. "What? Why?" "A fraud claim has been filed against you. Allegations of financial misconduct during your marriage. The assets are being held until further notice." Her blood ran cold. Derek. He had taken everything, and now, in one final move, he had ensured that she had nothing left. No money, no way to pay rent, no way to buy food. Emily barely remembered how she made it back to her apartment. The room felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in on her. She sank to the floor, knees pulled to her chest, trembling with the force of her rage, her devastation. Derek had been ruthless before, but this was cruelty beyond measure. He didn't just want to erase her. He wanted to destroy her. She felt like she was being buried alive, beneath shame, beneath grief, beneath a despair so vast it swallowed every sliver of hope. The silence of the apartment wasn't comforting anymore. It was suffocating. She pressed her back against the wall and sobbed for the first time in weeks. Not quietly, not gracefully, but with the guttural sounds of someone who had reached the very edge of survival. And for a terrifying moment, she felt herself slipping. The weight of it all pressed down on her, a darkness she had never known curling around the edges of her mind. It would be so easy to give in, to let the hopelessness swallow her whole. But then, something shifted. She caught her reflection in the window, her own eyes staring back at her, filled with something unfamiliar. Not just pain, not just grief, fury, righteous, burning fury. She was tired of being beaten down, tired of being the victim of Derek's games. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her phone. There was only one person left who might be able to help her. She dialed Marcus Hale. When he answered, she didn't waste time. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "For what?" he asked. She clenched her jaw. "To fight." Emily sat across from Marcus Hale, her hands clasped tightly together as she tried to steady her breathing. It had been days since she made that call, since she uttered those words, "I'm ready to fight." Now, sitting in his sleek, minimalist office, she knew there was no turning back. Marcus leaned back in his chair, flipping through the thick file on his desk. "You were right to come to me," Marcus said finally, tapping a page with the end of his pen. "Derek didn't just screw you over. He did it with precision. This wasn't just a man looking to leave his wife. He planned this for years." Emily swallowed hard. She already knew that. She had lived through it. "But he made mistakes," Marcus continued, his sharp blue eyes locking onto hers. "And we're going to make sure he pays for every single one." She exhaled, gripping the armrests of her chair. "Where do we start?" Marcus's smirk was razor sharp. "We take apart everything he built." The next few days were a whirlwind of investigation. Marcus and his team combed through every document related to her marriage, every financial transaction, every contract Derek had signed over the past 5 years. It didn't take long before they found it. A series of questionable transfers. Large sums of money moved from their joint accounts into Derek's company right before he filed for divorce. Marcus's fingers drummed against the desk as he pieced the evidence together. "Your lawyer during the divorce settlement, he was in on it." Emily felt her stomach drop. "What?" "He stalled negotiations. Deliberately missed key filing deadlines. He let Derek move assets without challenge," Marcus explained, shaking his head. "I've seen this play before. Derek bought him off." Her blood ran cold. All this time, she had thought she had just been unlucky, that Derek had outmaneuvered her legally, that she had simply been powerless. But no, the game had been rigged from the start. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "We have grounds to reopen your divorce case. We can sue for fraudulent transfer of assets. And if we push hard enough, we can take this beyond civil court." She met his gaze, her heart pounding. "You mean criminal charges?" He nodded. "Derek Langston committed financial fraud. and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. As the case against Derek began to form, Marcus had another team look into Sabrina. The results came in quicker than expected. Sabrina had lied. She wasn't pregnant. She never had been. The entire thing had been a carefully calculated move to force Emily out of Derek's life before she could fight back. Emily's hands curled into fists as she read the report. Marcus slid across the desk. Medical records confirmed no recent pregnancy, no fertility treatments, no OB/GYN visits within the last year. She played him, Marcus muttered, shaking his head. She knew exactly what would push you over the edge. Rage simmered beneath Emily's skin. But it wasn't just at Sabrina. It was at herself. For believing it. For thinking, even for a second, that Derek had moved on, that he had something real with Sabrina. But no, it had never been about love. It had always been about control. Marcus leaned back, watching her carefully. "You okay?" She exhaled shakily, nodding. More than okay. Because now, she had fuel. As Emily prepared for the legal battle ahead, Derek found himself in a different kind of war. At first, he had reveled in his freedom. With Emily gone, he was free to step fully into the world. Sabrina had introduced him to exclusive deals, powerful investors, a life without baggage. But that illusion shattered quickly. Sabrina was no longer the indulgent, easygoing woman who had soothed his frustrations with whispered reassurances and expensive gifts. She had begun making demands. She wanted control. Derek found himself signing more documents than ever, contracts he barely had time to review, agreements he wasn't sure benefited him. She wanted access to company accounts, to decision-making power, and when he hesitated, she reminded him that she had helped him get here, that he owed her. Then one evening, she slid a thick document in front of him, a prenuptial agreement. Derek frowned, flipping through it. "What the hell is this?" Sabrina smiled, crossing her legs elegantly. "Security. For both of us." His stomach turned. If he signed this and they divorced, she would walk away with half his remaining assets, more than he had ever given Emily. For the first time, Derek felt a flicker of unease. He was being cornered, and there was nothing he could do about it. Meanwhile, Emily was drowning in doubt. Despite the evidence, despite the strong case Marcus had built, the fear of losing still gripped her. What if Derek still found a way to win? What if he walked away unscathed, while she ended up worse than before? One night, as she sat in Marcus's office, going over the case details, he saw the hesitation in her eyes. "You don't think we can win," he stated. It wasn't a question. Emily hesitated. I've lost so much already. I don't know if I can take another hit." Marcus leaned forward, voice steady. "Let me tell you something about men like Derek. They win because people let them, because the women they destroy are too beaten down to fight back." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "You are not one of those women." A lump formed in her throat. "I don't care how much money he has, how many people he's paid off. He made mistakes, and I plan to make him regret every single one," Marcus continued. "But I need to know if you're all in." She stared at the papers spread out before her, at the proof of everything Derek had done. She thought about the sleepless nights, the humiliation, the fear of not knowing where her next paycheck would come from. She thought about the way he had looked at her when he threw those divorce papers on the table, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience to be discarded. Then she thought about Sabrina, the woman who had manipulated her, stolen her life, and now, ironically, was doing the same thing to Derek. No, she wasn't going to let them win. She met Marcus's gaze, her voice firm. "I'm all in." The next morning, Marcus filed the lawsuit. The legal war had begun. And Derek Langston had no idea what was coming for him. The ballroom shimmered under the glow of golden chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of imported roses and aged champagne. Every detail of the evening had been meticulously planned, nothing short of perfection. Sabrina Cole wouldn't have it any other way. Tonight was a celebration, a declaration to the world that she and Derek had won. The Langston name still held power, and she had successfully secured her place at his side, leaving Emily Turner nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered among their circle. Guests from the upper echelons of society mingled, sipping on champagne, exchanging pleasantries, and offering Derek their congratulations, not just on his upcoming marriage, but on his supposed triumph over his ex-wife. Derek basked in the admiration, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he shook hands with investors and executives who still saw him as a formidable force. He had done it. He had erased Emily. He had stripped her of everything, her home, her finances, her reputation. There was nothing left of her now. Or so he thought. The murmur of polite conversation hummed through the ballroom, uninterrupted, until the doors at the far end of the room swung open. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The chatter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. Emily Turner had arrived. She stood tall, poised, her entrance commanding the kind of attention Sabrina had spent years cultivating. But unlike Sabrina, who built her power on manipulation, Emily exuded something far more dangerous: resilience. She wasn't the broken woman Derek had discarded. She wasn't the defeated ex-wife scraping by in the shadows. She was radiant in an elegant black gown that clung to her frame with effortless grace. Her hair swept up in a style that elongated the delicate curve of her neck. Confidence rolled off her in waves as she stepped further into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor in slow, deliberate strides. But inside, her heart raced. Every step was deliberate, but her hands had trembled before she entered. She had stood outside the doors for nearly 5 minutes, staring at her reflection in the glossy marble, wondering if she truly belonged in this room full of people who had once cheered her downfall. Her breath had caught, but not from fear, from power. For the first time, she was walking into a space that once rejected her, and she was doing it on her terms. Whispers erupted around her. She looks different, stronger. She's not supposed to be here. Sabrina's fingers tightened around her champagne flute, her knuckles white. Derek, who had just been in the middle of a conversation with an executive, went rigid. He forced himself to maintain his air of control, but Emily saw it, the flicker of unease in his eyes. He had not anticipated this. "Good evening," Emily greeted, her voice smooth, carrying through the room with a quiet authority that turned every head in her direction. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Derek recovered quickly, slipping into his usual mask of arrogance. He stepped forward, a mocking smile curving his lips. "Crashing parties now, Emily? That's desperate, even for you." She tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Oh, I wouldn't say I'm crashing. I'm simply here to witness history." Her eyes flicked toward Sabrina, who hadn't moved, her expression a carefully curated mask of indifference. "A shame, really. I was expecting a wedding. What happened?" Before either of them could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." Marcus Hale had arrived. He strode through the crowd with the kind of confidence that made powerful men uneasy. Dressed in a tailored suit, his presence alone commanded respect. Unlike Derek, who thrived on empty bravado, Marcus was methodical, calculating. He never made a move without ensuring it would bring the most damage to his opponent. And tonight, his opponent was Derek Langston. Emily stepped aside, giving Marcus the floor as he pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. "I won't take up too much of your time," he began, his voice calm, composed. "But as you're all gathered here to celebrate Mr. Langston's accomplishments, I thought it only fair that the truth be revealed." Derek tensed. "What the hell is this?" Marcus smirked. "This," he said, lifting the folder, "is the documented proof of Mr. Langston's extensive financial fraud. It details how he illegally transferred assets, manipulated legal contracts, and orchestrated a smear campaign against his ex-wife in an attempt to discredit her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Derek let out a scoff, but there was a crack in his confidence now. "This is ridiculous. No one's going to believe." Marcus held up a hand. "I wasn't finished." He turned slightly, addressing the room as a whole. "Included in this file is also evidence of bribery. Specifically, payments made to legal representatives to ensure Emily Turner walked away from her marriage with nothing. A clear violation of legal ethics, and one the court will undoubtedly find concerning." A murmur spread through the guests. Some took a step back from Derek, as if his mere presence might taint them. Others exchanged wary glances, the weight of scandal already settling in. Sabrina, for the first time that night, spoke. "This has nothing to do with me," she said coolly, setting down her glass. Derek handled his affairs on his own. Marcus turned his gaze to her, an almost amused smile playing at his lips. "That's interesting," he mused, flipping to another page. Because according to these records, you personally facilitated several of these transactions. In fact, there's a lovely little email chain detailing how you encouraged Derek to accelerate the asset transfers before the divorce proceedings began. Sabrina went still, and just like that, the room turned on her. Derek's world was crumbling, and Sabrina, ever the survivor, was already shifting away from him. I had no idea, she said, her voice measured, controlled. I was misled. Emily watched as Derek turned to Sabrina, realization dawning in his eyes. He had always believed he was in control, that Sabrina was his willing partner, that she needed him. But in this moment, he saw the truth. She was discarding him, and she didn't even flinch. I think it's best if we postpone the wedding, Sabrina announced smoothly, her tone devoid of emotion, until this situation is resolved. Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. His empire was collapsing. His allies were abandoning him. The people who once flattered him were now whispering behind their hands, eager to distance themselves from the scandal that would inevitably consume him. And then, finally, Emily spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply walked up to Derek, looking him in the eye with a calm, unwavering expression. You once called me useless, she said softly, so only he could hear. But it looks like you're the one being thrown away now. She turned without another word, walking out of the ballroom with Marcus beside her. Derek stood frozen, his world unraveling, his downfall set in motion. Emily didn't need to look back. The battle wasn't over, but tonight, she had won the first war. The moment Emily's lawsuit hit the court system, the news spread like wildfire. What had started as whispered rumors at the party soon became front-page headlines in every major business and legal publication. Billionaire mogul Derek Langston faces fraud allegations from ex-wife. Scandal rocks Langston Enterprises, financial deception and corporate corruption. The lawsuit that could bring a titan to his knees. Marcus had been thorough. Every piece of evidence meticulously gathered. Every shady transaction Derek had orchestrated. Every financial loophole he had exploited. It was all laid bare. In black and white, court documents detailed the fraudulent asset transfers, the bribery, the calculated smear campaign against Emily, and the unethical manipulation of their divorce proceedings. The lawsuit wasn't just about reclaiming Emily's rightful share. It was about exposing Derek for what he truly was, a liar, a cheat, and a criminal. The backlash was immediate. Investors panicked. Shareholders demanded answers. Langston Enterprises, once an untouchable force in the corporate world, now stood at the center of a financial storm. The media feasted on the scandal, dragging Derek's name through the mud. With every new revelation, Derek tried to maintain control, issuing public statements, denying the allegations, calling Emily's claims baseless and vindictive. But the damage was already done. The more he spoke, the worse it got. His arrogance, his dismissive attitude, everything played against him in the court of public opinion. Behind the scenes, his world was unraveling. One by one, his business partners began pulling out of joint ventures. Deals that had been in the works for months suddenly fell apart. Investors withdrew their funds, unwilling to be associated with someone under federal investigation for financial fraud. Then came the real blow. The courts issued a freeze on his personal and business accounts, pending a full investigation. Derek was losing control, and for the first time in his life, he had no backup plan. At first, he assumed Sabrina would stand by him. She had been his greatest ally, the one who had encouraged him to take risks, the one who had whispered in his ear that he was untouchable. But when the walls started closing in, Sabrina did what she did best. She calculated her next move, and it didn't include him. Derek realized something was wrong when he arrived at her penthouse one evening seeking reassurance, only to find her packing her designer luggage with quiet efficiency. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, stepping forward. Sabrina barely glanced at him. "Leaving." His stomach turned. "We can fix this," he said, reaching for her arm. She pulled away, smoothing the silk blouse she had just folded. "There is no together, Derek. There never was." His blood ran cold. "You used me." Sabrina's lips curled into something resembling amusement. "Of course I did. And you used me too. That's how the game works." She zipped up her suitcase and turned to face him fully. "But here's the difference. You got sloppy, and I don't associate with failures." The word failure hit him harder than any headline had. It was the same word he had once used to describe others, rivals, employees, even Emily. Now it was pointed at him, and he had no armor left. His throat dried. For the first time in years, he didn't have a response. Rage boiled beneath his skin. "I made you. Without me, you're nothing." She laughed, a sharp, biting sound. "No, darling. Without me, you're nothing." She lifted her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers typing something before she turned the screen toward him. A series of financial transfers. Her investments in his company. The assets she had moved in his name were being liquidated as they spoke. "I'm pulling out," she said simply. "And I strongly suggest you don't try to stop me." Derek lunged for her phone, but Sabrina stepped back, her voice turning cold. "I need a man who can bring me power, not one who's about to lose everything." With that, she walked past him, rolling her suitcase behind her. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. She never looked back. Derek stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, his mind spinning. He had been so certain, so sure of his control. But the silence that settled around him now was deafening. For the first time, he felt the weight of abandonment, not as a consequence, but as a sentence. And then the calls started coming in. His chief financial officer, his legal team, the board of Langston Enterprises. The news was worse than he had anticipated. Without Sabrina's financial backing, his company was bleeding out fast. He tried reaching out to banks, to old allies, to anyone who might give him a lifeline, but no one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. The final blow came the next morning, when he arrived at Langston Enterprises headquarters and found the boardroom filled with grim-faced executives. "Derek," one of the senior members said, his voice heavy with finality, "you need to step down." Panic clawed at Derek's throat. "You can't be serious." "We are. The shareholders are demanding it. The lawsuits, the financial losses, your leadership is no longer viable." His hands curled into fists. "This is my company." "Not anymore." The vote was unanimous. Derek Langston was officially removed as CEO of the company he had built from the ground up. By the end of the week, Langston Enterprises filed for bankruptcy. Stocks plummeted. Employees were let go. The name that had once commanded fear and respect in the business world was now synonymous with failure and disgrace. And just like that, the empire he had sacrificed everything for, his marriage, his integrity, his future, was gone. In the days that followed, Derek spiraled. The friends he had once entertained at lavish dinners stopped returning his calls. The reporters who had once begged for his time now ripped him apart in every article, every broadcast. Desperation took hold. He tried reaching Sabrina, but her number was disconnected. He went to her penthouse, only to find it empty, cleared out as if she had never been there at all. Each room was hollow, stripped of the perfume, the laughter, the schemes. He wandered through the silence, hoping for a trace of her, even a scent, but there was nothing. Just his reflection in the mirror, and he barely recognized the man looking back. Alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the ghosts of his past arrogance, Derek finally understood. He had lost everything. And there was no one left to save him. The world had moved on. The empire he had built, the power he had wielded, the influence he had once held over every room he walked into. It was all gone. Derek Langston was no longer a name that commanded respect. It was a cautionary tale, a whispered warning in corporate boardrooms about the dangers of greed and arrogance. His accounts were frozen. His assets had been seized. Langston Enterprises, once a pillar of success, was now a bankrupt ruin, dissected by creditors and swallowed whole by its competitors. The media painted him as a villain. His name splashed across headlines that documented every misstep, every fraudulent deal, every betrayal. And then came the worst of it. He was officially barred from conducting business in any major financial institution, pending the ongoing fraud investigation. No one would lend him $1. No one would even take his calls. The people who had once hung on to his every word now avoided him like the plague. He was alone in the echoing silence of his empty penthouse. Derek sat on the floor, staring at the single bottle of whiskey. The place was unrecognizable, furniture repossessed, walls stripped bare. The suitcases Sabrina had once packed with expensive clothes were gone, along with everything of value. She had vanished, leaving him with nothing but debts, shame, and the gnawing realization that she had never loved him. She had used him just as he had used Emily. And yet when Sabrina walked away, she hadn't looked back. Emily had, not for him, but because she had been his wife. She had once loved him, truly, deeply, selflessly, and he had destroyed her for a fantasy that unraveled the moment reality came knocking. He had lost the one person who had ever truly cared. It took him days to admit it. But when the weight of his ruin finally crushed him, he knew there was only one place left to go. He had to see her. It was raining when Derek stumbled up the worn steps of Emily's modest apartment building. He had walked miles, no driver, no security, no entourage. He had sold his last watch that morning just to afford a meal. The once immaculate suits he had worn with effortless confidence were gone, replaced by an old coat that barely shielded him from the cold. He hadn't shaved in days. His hands trembled from exhaustion and hunger. When the door opened and Emily appeared in the dim light of the hallway, he barely recognized the look in her eyes. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't angry. She simply did not care. The sight of her hit harder than any headline. She stood calm, composed, and unshaken, a reflection of the woman he once tried to break, now completely out of his reach. For the first time, Derek understood what it meant to be truly invisible. He dropped to his knees, rainwater pooling around him. "Emily," his voice cracked, hoarse from days of silence. "Please." She said nothing. "I lost everything," he whispered. "She never loved me. She used me, the way I used you." His breath hitched as he met her gaze, searching for something, anything, that resembled the woman who had once held him close. "But you did. You," his voice broke. "You loved me, and I threw it away." She remained still, her expression unreadable. "I know I don't deserve it," he continued, desperation bleeding into his words. "But if you could just help me, give me a chance to fix this, to fix us." The smallest flicker of amusement crossed her face, though it held no warmth. "Us," she echoed softly. Derek nodded quickly, seizing onto the sliver of hope. "We can start over. I can be better. Her quiet laugh cut through the air like a knife. "You still think this is about you," she said, shaking her head. "You think you can lose everything and just come crawling back and I'll take you in?" His throat tightened. She took a step closer, her voice steady, unshaken. "You called me useless. You said I held you back, that I wasn't enough." She let the words sink in, let him drown in them. Then, with quiet finality, she said, "And now look at you." The silence that followed was unbearable. Derek couldn't breathe. He was no longer the man at the top of the world. He was the man begging for scraps at the feet of the woman he had torn down. Derek felt himself unraveling. "I was the only person who ever stood by you," she continued, "and you threw me away. For her." Her gaze hardened. "But let me tell you something, Derek. You deserved each other." His lips parted, but she didn't give him the chance to speak. She stepped back, and before he could even think to beg again, she shut the door. The soft click of the lock echoed louder than any courtroom gavel. It was final, undeniable, and it shattered him. He stayed there for hours, kneeling, waiting, hoping. She never opened the door again. By morning, he was gone. Derek Langston, the once great businessman, the man who had crushed anyone who stood in his way, had become nothing more than a shadow of himself. He wandered the city in a daze, penniless, homeless, a ghost in the streets he once ruled. The newspapers chronicled the final collapse of Langston Enterprises, the last remaining assets liquidated, the name stripped from every building that once bore it. And then, the final blow. A single photo made the front page. Derek Langston, disgraced CEO, hunched over and homeless. Clothes disheveled, stumbling out of what had once been his corporate headquarters, now owned by someone else. A man who had it all. A man who lost everything. The courtroom was packed. Rows of journalists, business executives, and former associates filled the seats, eager to witness the final downfall of Derek Langston. The trial had become a media sensation, a spectacle of greed, betrayal, and corporate corruption. The once revered businessman now sat at the defendant's table, his suit hanging loosely on his frame, his face gaunt and weary. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate man fighting for the last scraps of his dignity. Marcus sat beside Emily, flipping through a thick stack of documents with the ease of a man who knew he had already won. Every piece of evidence had been carefully prepared, Every loophole Derek had used now laid bare for the court to see. He had underestimated her. Underestimated the power of the truth. And today, that truth would bury him. The prosecution presented their case methodically, each new revelation another nail in Derek's coffin. Bank records, fraudulent contracts, hidden offshore accounts. All of it detailed his deliberate scheme to strip Emily of everything. They played recordings of phone calls, emails exchanged between Derek and his legal team outlining how he had orchestrated her financial ruin with chilling precision. And then came the witnesses, former employees, business partners, even a few of Derek's closest allies took the stand. Some spoke out of self-preservation, desperate to distance themselves from his crimes. Others testified out of long-held resentment, eager to see him pay for years of exploitation and deceit. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source, Sabrina Cole. She arrived at the courthouse with her usual poise, dressed in a muted designer ensemble that screamed control. But as she took the stand, her expression was carefully composed, her words chosen with meticulous calculation. "I had no knowledge of Derek Langston's illegal activities," she said smoothly, hands folded in her lap. "I was misled, just like everyone else." The courtroom murmured with quiet disbelief, but Sabrina remained unshaken. She played her part to perfection, the betrayed partner, the unwitting accomplice. And then, with a perfectly timed pause, she dropped the final blow. "To prove my innocence," she announced, tilting her chin slightly, "I have voluntarily provided the prosecution with all financial records and communications in my possession, including emails and recorded conversations between myself and Mr. Langston that confirm his intent to commit fraud." Derek shot up from his seat. "You lying?" His lawyer yanked him back down before he could finish, but the damage was done. The judge silenced the room with a single glance, but the shift had already occurred. Derek had lost whatever fragile control he had left. He had been betrayed by the one person he thought would always stand by him. The trial dragged on for weeks, but the outcome had already been decided. When the jury returned with their verdict, the tension in the air was palpable. Guilty on all counts. Derek barely reacted. There was no outburst, no plea for mercy. Just a slow, defeated exhale as the weight of his fate settled on his shoulders. The judge delivered the sentence swiftly. Several years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. No possibility of early release. No second chances. When the gavel struck, sealing his fate, Derek finally crumbled. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned toward Emily, his expression unreadable. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was hatred. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he understood the consequences of his actions. But if he had been expecting sympathy, he would find none. Emily met his gaze, unwavering. She had spent years living under his shadow, believing she was powerless. But now, as he was dragged from the courtroom like a common criminal, she knew the truth. She had won. The fallout was swift. With Derek behind bars, the authorities turned their attention to Sabrina. She had thought her cooperation would shield her from consequences, but the investigation didn't stop at Derek. They found evidence buried deep in financial records, evidence she had hoped would never surface, linking her to fraudulent transactions of her own. She had played her cards well, but not well enough. Her assets were seized, her accounts were frozen. And when the charges were filed, she realized too late that her power had never been real. The woman who once commanded attention wherever she went was now a disgraced socialite, abandoned by the very people who had once worshipped her. When the news broke, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction, not because she had wanted revenge, but because for the first time in a long time, the world had balanced itself. She had spent so long fighting to reclaim what had been taken from her, to prove that she was more than just a casualty of Derek's ambition. And now, standing outside the courthouse, breathing in the crisp autumn air, she realized she had finally done it. Her name was no longer spoken with pity. It was spoken with respect. Reporters crowded around her as she stepped into the sunlight, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in her direction. "Emily, how does it feel to finally have justice?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I never wanted revenge," she said simply. "I just wanted the truth to come out." "And what's next for you?" another reporter called. Emily smiled, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders. A new beginning. She turned away from the cameras, away from the remnants of the battle she had fought so hard to win, and for the first time in a long time, she walked forward without looking back. 1 year had passed. The echoes of her past still existed, somewhere in old newspaper clippings, in the hushed voices of those who had followed her journey. But Emily had long since stopped looking back. The woman she once was, the one defined by heartbreak and betrayal, no longer existed. She had been remade, stronger, unshaken. Her life was no longer dictated by Derek Langston's shadow. She had built something of her own, something that truly mattered. With the settlement she had won, she hadn't indulged in extravagance or revenge. Instead, she had turned her pain into purpose. The Turner Foundation for Women had started as an idea, a desperate need to ensure that no other woman would endure what she had. Now it was a thriving organization, a sanctuary for women escaping toxic marriages, battling the aftermath of psychological abuse, or simply trying to rebuild their lives. Legal aid, therapy, financial guidance, her foundation provided it all. She had become the woman she had needed a year ago. That afternoon, Emily stepped out of her office, the late sunlight pouring through the large windows. The walls of the foundation were lined with stories. Real stories of women who had walked through those doors broken, but not defeated. Some of them now worked alongside her, paying it forward, lifting others the way they had been lifted. It was everything she had hoped for, and through it all Marcus had been there, never demanding, never pushing, just there, a steady, unwavering presence. He had helped her build this, had fought beside her in court, had sat with her in quiet moments of uncertainty, had reminded her over and over that she was more than what Derek had tried to reduce her to. But he had never once asked for more than she was willing to give. She had been grateful for that space, grateful that he had given her time to heal, to stand on her own 2 feet. But now, a year later, as she watched him from across the room, laughing with one of the foundation's clients, she felt something shift inside her. Something warm, something terrifyingly real. She hadn't believed in love anymore. Not after Derek. But this was something different. That night, the foundation held its 1-year anniversary gala, a celebration of resilience, of everything they had accomplished, and everyone who had made it possible. The room was filled with laughter, soft music playing in the background as people mingled, toasting to the future. Emily stood at the heart of it all, taking it in. She had spent so long being seen as Derek Langston's ex-wife. But tonight, no one whispered his name. No one looked at her with pity. Tonight, she was just Emily Turner, a survivor, a leader, a woman who had fought for her own future and won. As the night wound down, Marcus stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. At first, she thought it was just another speech, something planned, a thank you to the donors, the volunteers. But then he looked at her, and she knew. The room quieted. "I'm not great with speeches," he admitted, his voice steady but warm, "and I don't have anything rehearsed." He paused. "But there's something I need to say." Emily felt her breath catch. When I met Emily, she was in the middle of the biggest fight of her life, and I knew from the moment I saw her that she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for justice, for truth, for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. He exhaled, his gaze never leaving hers. And she won. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Marcus took a step closer. "I've spent a year watching her rebuild herself, brick by brick, with no one's help but her own, and I never once wanted to step in and take that fight away from her. Because she didn't need saving." Silence. "I don't want to save you, Emily. I don't want to change you. I just want to walk beside you, for however long you'll have me." Her chest tightened, emotions swelling in her throat. "Marry me." The words were simple. No grand declarations, no promises of fixing what had been broken, because she wasn't broken anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel fear. She felt ready. A slow smile spread across her lips, and she stepped forward. "Yes." The room erupted into cheers, but she barely heard them, because in that moment, all she could hear was her own heartbeat, steady and sure. Marcus took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. It wasn't extravagant, wasn't gaudy or excessive. It was perfect. And for the first time in years, Emily Turner cried. But this time, They were tears of happiness. As the applause settled and the night continued, Emily stepped outside for a breath of air. The city stretched before her, alive and endless, a reminder of how far she had come. Marcus joined her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. She didn't pull away. "What happens now?" he asked, a teasing smile on his lips. Emily looked up at him, then back at the skyline. "Anything we want." And as they walked back inside, hand in hand, the past finally let go of her. Emily Turner had won her life back. And this was only the beginning. Justice isn't always swift, and revenge rarely heals. But sometimes the greatest victory isn't about retribution. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming dignity, reclaiming identity, reclaiming the power that was once stolen. True strength isn't found in how hard you hit back, but in how you rise after being knocked down. Betrayal has a way of breaking people. But survival is a choice. And for those who have been cast aside, underestimated, or told they were nothing without someone else, there's always a way forward. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. Dear friend, there are moments in life when everything falls apart. Not as a punishment, but as an invitation to rise. Emily's journey wasn't about erasing the past. It was about facing it, learning from it, and standing taller because of it. The Stoics taught us that we cannot control what happens, only how we respond. And Emily responded not with vengeance, but with resolve. Not with bitterness, but with belief in her own worth. She didn't rebuild the life she lost. She created one even stronger, brick by brick, heartache by heartache. Sometimes, the most profound triumph isn't in defeating others. It's in refusing to be defeated by them. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep telling stories that remind us we are never as powerless as they think.